Oh yeah, just to remind newbies about that, we got a few slides here. If you can read them, just to let people know what we are actually talking about. World control.
Right. Well, from Edward Berman, The Assassins, Holy Killers of Islam. All revolutionaries and murderers since then had been part of a single Templar society, including Cromwell, the murderer of Henry VIII of France, conspirators in Portugal, Brazil, and Sweden, and of course, Robespierre and Danton. And from Thomas Parker, the Knights Templar in England, he says the Templars were firmly established in England by 1154 and had already obtained lands, privileges, and exemptions of importance. This was the foundation on which the Templars were to build their great edifice of power, wealth, and influence. In their capacity as financial agents of the crown, they became for a time a direct part of the king's administration. In economic affairs, the Templars played their most important role. Wealthy from their own lands and goods, which they managed efficiently, constantly active in trade and commerce, which they profited from, and deeply concerned with matters of finance in which they engaged effectively and creatively, the Templars became expert accountants, outstanding administrators, and active promoters of credit. In a very real sense, during the late 12th and all of the 13th centuries, they were the greatest bankers in England, easily overshadowing the Jews.
Yeah. And if you study the symbolism even today of these credit unions, let alone banks and other financial, even insurance companies, the whole thing. That's how I got started in all of this. You'd be amazed what you find. We gave one example just a minute ago, but oh my God, when you start getting into the symbolism, I mean, we can link up to an article I have by Sword and by Shield, by Sword and Shield. It might be again a good introduction on that. Let's go on.
And again, from Thomas Parker, the close relationship of the Templars to the English crown is also to be seen in the grant of privileges to them and in their use as officials and advisors to the kings in matters political and administrative, as well as economic. To their religious privileges and exemption from ecclesiastical taxation of all kinds and independence from all ecclesiastical authority save that of the Pope must be added their political privileges, granted to them and repeatedly confirmed by all the kings from Stephen to Edward I, and of exemption from secular taxation and ordinary feudal burdens, and of jurisdiction over their lands and persons, and over those of their vassals and tenants as well. These privileges made the Templars independent of local ecclesiastical and lay authorities and responsible only to the Pope and the King. The kings found the Templars reliable and effective as envoys and advisors, and as collectors and keepers of royal revenues.
So the ones who talk about a Jewish conspiracy never mention a word about any of this. All these exemptions mean that while everybody else in the world was under heavy taxation and treated like fucking feudal serfs, these guys could just mint money, hand over fist for hundreds and hundreds of years, working only with the elite. Bankers to the royal houses. Let's go on.
And Michael Howard, from his great book, Occult Conspiracy. By the beginning of the 13th century, the Templars had become the international bankers of Europe and were appointed treasurers to the French royal family and the Vatican. It's incredible. And Nicholas Hagar from Secret History of the West, he says, almost at once the Templars became bankers to every throne in Europe. They lent money to hard up monarchs at low interest rates and transferred money for merchant bankers. They became money changers and powerful capitalists who conducted diplomacy between monarchs. In England, the master of the temple was soon given precedence over all other priors and abbots.
Incredible.
And from Knight and Butler, the Hiram Key Revisited, the Knights Templar came to own estates of varying size scattered throughout Europe, from Denmark, Scotland, and the Orkney Islands in the north to France, Italy, and Spain in the south. In England and Wales alone, they had over 5,000 properties. They also extended their interests into Africa, establishing a major presence in Ethiopia. Reminds me
It
of
could be
that
that.
buried church that they found out there in Africa somewhere. I can't remember exactly the location, but they found some buried church underground, and there was Templar and Judaic symbols all over it.
Right. I remember that. And some people think, and I'm with them, that their real hoard might have been buried there.
Mm.
The real mass hoard, after taken from the Holy Land, might have been moved to African plains and dug deep because they knew that nobody lived there and nobody was hanging around there except a bunch of, extremely primitive people. And also, you have your Visigoths had an empire where we know Libya to be today. So there's a good chance that they would have had guards overlooking that at the time as well, these Templars, because they were in with the Visigoths and the Vandals. And those guys even had an anti-Roman empire that lasted hundreds of years. So even though the treasure may have been moved around later on, I think this North Africa would be one place where they first deposited it after getting their hands on it.
Yeah, that makes sense. This one's from Badgett and Lincoln and Lay, Holy Blood, Holy Grail. In 1139, a papal bull was issued by Pope Innocent II, a former Cistercian monk at Clairvaux and protege of Saint Bernard. According to this bull, the Templars would owe allegiance to no secular or ecclesiastical power other than the Pope himself. In other words, they were rendered totally independent of all kings, princes, and prelates, and of all the interference from both political and religious authorities. They had become, in effect, a law unto themselves, an autonomous an autonomous international empire.
Yeah. So you just don't dismantle that. Here we have it. Same with the Guyonum, right? Same with the Sadducees. Oh, they just disappeared. Here we have the same lie with the Templars. And note that Innocent II is a pope. Well, I thought the popes were allegedly fifth sect. Yes, they are. But that didn't stop, at various points of history, the Templars themselves getting one of their own men. This is just the way it worked, Some popes actually were fourth sect, even back then. Helping, the claims of people like myself when I say, well, there was a total takeover in the late 19th century. But look, here you have it, even in their own time. Innocent II was one of their own people. So there's even been times when they had their own agents as popes ruling over Rome and the papacy. So bear that in mind as well.
From Butler and Defoe, the Knights Templar revealed, the Templars eventually became so rich that the monarchs of some of the kingdoms within which they operated were wholly dependent on their support. Several kings of England actually lodged the treasury of the realm at the Templar headquarters in London as surety against the massive debts they ran up with the order. This gave the Templars great power to influence decision-making, and they regularly acted as arbiters for warring monarchs.
There you go.
We are entitled to ask, from where did the financial impetus to even commence the Templar Empire come? The 9 knights who attended the Troyes gathering of 1128 were, according to Orthodox accounts, poor. In fact, this is reflected in this name chosen for the order because they were the poor knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. But nothing could be further from the truth, for even if the founder knights themselves were not of middle-ranking aristocratic stock, they had extremely rich backers, not the least of whom was the fabulously rich Hugh Count of Champagne. But all the money in Champagne could not have financed the exploits of the Templars on the field of battle alone.
Oh, is that so? Well, what do we do with this then? Isn't that an interesting piece of information? You see? So right away, the official accounts of who funded whom don't add up. They're too wealthy. These aren't very wealthy men. These are exceptionally wealthy men. Well, you can immediately know right away that then who in the ancient past had that kind of wealth. You can really, the list of suspects is not that long. And one of them is this house of Parthia. Another one are the Egyptian Atenists. And through Professor Feather and Allegro, we discovered that there is a direct connection to gold and silver and bullion and wealth from Akhenaten, found in the Judean desert. But when you link in the Parthians that no one else does, that were present there working with the Jews, had collaborations with the Jews, and that the Parthians are connected, these they turn up as the Benjaminites, they're married in with that group. Well, that's easy to understand. If the Benjamites were expelled from their homelands, all you have to look at is that they simply went and joined their fellows who had been displaced many centuries before, the Parthians. They joined up with the Parthians. They're friends of theirs. They're related. There is the missing piece. So the Benjaminites, right, in exactly the same way as the Parthians made good connections with the Nazarenes and the Galileans of Judea, now we add another component. Amongst their number, probably mercenaries in their pay, were these Benjaminites. And the Benjaminites started working with gold after being first farmers and warriors, now had access to gold. Well, who could have given it to them? Where did they get it? It's these bloody Parthians, this house of Edessa, of which Mary was a member. And she's fabulously wealthy. Joseph of Arimathea, fabulously wealthy. They're kings in their own right. My God, they are claimants on the whole Roman Empire. Lots of people bow to this group. They're known. And when the Knights Templar, as Ralph Ellis found out, headed out on their so-called First Crusade, they don't go to Jerusalem. They bypass it and head straight for the lost city of Edessa. That hasn't even been mentioned in the Holy Scriptures at all. How can that be explained? Let's go on.
Conclusion.
Yeah, so, I mean, what more needs to be said? The money that they had is too excessive for just some duke or prince to be, the origin of it. Even several. And this author's found this out. That is really, really intriguing. But let's conclude. Yeah, what we got first there.
It is not without significance that the Merovingian dynasty arose soon after the Parthians of Persia were overthrown by the Sassanids.
That's right. In a previous program, we talked about this, right? That there was 3 major dynasties in Persia. And certainly the Second Reich of the Parthians and the Third Reich of the Sassanids were always in conflict with the Romans. We talked about that. But internal pressures and struggles overthrew the Parthians in and around this time. The Sassanids ended up ruling for the longest period of time in Persia. But what happened to these Persians? They're deposed. These Parthians, they're deposed. Naturally, some stayed to continue the fight, but they're basically a deposed empire. And we know from Ralph Ellis's work that there was lots of schisms, lots of problems. And we know that Isus Manu's group was actually expelled from Parthia. Well, that's it. That's the key. It's branches of this group that ended up going to their provinces that they already ruled over, in Judea, even though that part has been scrubbed from history. Judea, Palestine, they had lands there and were well known in the area. But the focus has been on the Herods. And by the way, the Herods weren't Jews themselves. They were converted Idumeans, or Edomites, as some people, the Greeks called them, Edomites. They weren't even, so even the Herod family are not originally Jews. Some members of the followers of John the Baptist were not Jews. They were Samaritans. But back to these Parthians. You see, they're exiled, and that's why they go and become part of the fourth sect and start recruiting in the 2nd century AD. You see, they recruit Jews to their cause. They're fighting the Romans. Well, not much has changed. But as we move toward this period of Clovis, the rise of the Merovingians, it's also close to the time when the Sassanids have deposed the Parthians from power, thereby displacing them, obviously. So it doesn't take a rocket science to make the connection that not, having rule at their home base, they move, or certain branches of them moved into the west. And these are the Sicambrian Franks. These are what some scholars call the Benjaminites. But we are making the link to say it's very plausible that they're not just the Benjamites of the old tribe of Judah. That expelled tribe went to Arcadia, Greece. But why would they not also then go and hang out with their Parthian friends? And that's what I believe they are. And they're the ancestors of the Merovingians. Let's go to the next one.
If, following their captivity in Assyria, the 10 tribes of Israel dispersed westward and were considered lost, it follows that the appellation Jew is misapplied and wholly spurious. If the Benjaminites were deemed criminal pariahs and cast out by their fellow tribesmen, it follows once again that the appellation Jew can only be employed disingenuously.
Of course it does. How can you possibly talk about a Jewish conspiracy when you know these facts? You can't. And if you talk about the Israelites, you're on weak ground, because the Israelites are just completely lost tribes who got lost because they moved west and married in with everybody else. You cannot make the case of any kind of Jewish conspiracy with that. That's dead. That's a dead loss. And if you try it, you're just looking like a fool. You can't make it with the 2 tribes that are left, because one of those tribes was expelled as pariahs from Judaism. How can they be Jewish when the Jewish world has called them out as criminals and has disowned them completely? Anyone who then tries to continue using the word Jew for that group is absolutely lying to you and disingenuous, because Jews themselves have not accepted them. On the contrary, they've thrown them out, like they threw out Jacob Frank later on and Zabbatai Zevi later on, and other false messiahs. But the anti-Semite knows nothing about this. And anyway, what's left? One tribe of Judah? And you're going to tell me that the modern conspiracy, after learning all these facts that we've talked about, you're actually still trying to argue that one little tribe of Judah? Because that's essentially what you're saying. When we look at all the evidence here, you are literally saying that the world's Jewish conspiracy is this one tribe. This is the little island that that you still inhabit with all the sharks around it. You're still trying to hold this ground. And with the avalanche of other information that we've presented showing a greater story, where Jews are involved, some Jews, some rebellious Jews, and we've explained all of that in previous work, where you get these atheistic, nihilistic Jews, their etiology, how they even come about, how you get those people. They definitely exist. They are a demographic, and they've played a role in world history, but they are not by any means, not even a shadow of the architects of control. Absolutely no way. And then if you add into that mix the endless pogroms against Jews in different cultures and countries which we've already spoken about, how that all happened and why, the case for a Jewish conspiracy becomes an uncase. Let's go to the last one.
Even the term Semitic is not appropriate in this regard. Given that the so-called Israelites were members of the Hyksos nobility of Egypt, and before that, Scythians, we see that, to the dismay of anti-Semites everywhere, They were originally of Indo-European stock, that is, Aryans.
See? Puff. You're done. You can lay it to rest. Once you have these facts, and even Sigmund Freud had a great, insight into this. He thought that Moses was Akhenaten or close to that, and speculated on all these matters. And in the introduction to his book, Moses and Monotheism, he said that his greatest threat wasn't Jews listening to his new theories. It was the Catholic Church. It was the papacy. It's right in the introduction to the book that he thought they would be incensed and they would be his greatest foes. Not Jews, to learn that their Moses was really an Egyptian pharaoh. He said, no, the ones who will really be threatened by that are the papacy. It's right there in black and white. I have 3 chapters on it in the Irish Origins of Civilization books. Men of great insight who knew how to read the symbolism correctly, who knew about the etymology of the terms and the words, to be able to see through it, and then do better than that, to bring together a semblance of the real story. Not perfect, but good enough for their times. Something that could be built on by others. Then, as I said, you not only have these BC migrations, but then what is this book about that we did with Caleb on the when Scotland was Jewish? There's another movement. In the AD period, yet again, another east to west movement of Jewish tribes up into the Britons, up into Scotland. How many people know about that? Right? So there's multiple movements, and one supports the case for the other. Because if you see, you have a precedent now. If such and such a tribe can do this, then other tribes could have done it. If you get Mary Magdalene and her people suddenly appearing in France, well, the Herods had big estates in France. The Merovingians were there. The Benjaminites were there. They said that the Sicambrian Franks had been there about 1,000 years before. So these houses of Parthia had empires in Judea. These are all facts. So the world is actually much more cosmopolitan. The Romans move in, like the Greeks had done before, to conquer, to take over lots of lands. So if Greece can do it and have a worldwide empire, and Rome can do it, how could the Persians not do it? Or the Egyptians? We know that when, in more recent times, when the Soviets, right, during the Second World War, invaded, look how many countries they took over. That became behind the Iron Curtain. Dozens of countries fell in Europe and elsewhere to the Soviet Union. But we have been skillfully mistaught in our schools from day one. Just a few facts to pacify the intellect, to disguise the fact that it's a lie network, right? Just enough of that. But ultimately, they rest on the fact that they know that people will not ask questions. There's no Captain Kirk getting up and go, question. Why does God need a spaceship? Not going to happen. And they've been absolutely incensed now that they have these mavericks, who have asked these questions and written these fine books. So there's always that they wheel out another Professor Black or whoever the hell, to try and knock conspiracy on the head. Good fucking luck with that. Like I told you, go to their own history. Ask them about the fall of the Roman Empire and if that is not consistent with the new facts that have been discovered. And if it turns out that it's not, then why have you been telling us all these lies for hundreds and hundreds of years? In places even as prestigious as Oxford and Cambridge and all the other fucking asshole universities in the world. They've been handing out PhDs and telling lie after lie even about that. The facts don't even come close to corroborating that story. and yet it's one of the biggest ones. Then what else have you been telling us lies about? Yeah, well, they're telling us lies about, all our forebears were all primitive. There's the pyramid right there. Okay? Take out a ruler and a protractor and have a go. Ralph Ellis is telling you that the site of Avebury in England is a map of the earth tilted at exactly the right axis that it is. Mapping that could have indicate what the axis was like 60,000 years ago. All the experts telling you about how old, say, Stonehenge and Newgrange are have all been decimated. All their late dating of the pyramid and of the, these Stonehenges, it's all laughable. They go back to at least 8,000 years BC. And even that is conservative, right? Everywhere you turn. Can they explain the Somerset Zodiac, which can only be seen from the air, or the Nazca Lines, or the Crystal Skull, or any of the things we ever talk about? It just goes on and on and on. But the movement of these races, to me, it's been fascinating. So, because I'm always trying to promulgate the East to West movement, the West to East movement, but that doesn't rule out that later on there's return journeys of all sorts of peoples. And of course, those movements are going to be caused by displacement, by invasion, and by famine, and by volcanic eruption. Of course they are. Only a fool would say no. But in that study, you want to go to find out who are these proto-nations that we've never fucking heard about. Did we know that the story of the Lady of the Lake comes from Persia? How many people would tell you that? Or that the French have taken the responsibility, the reputation of the courtly love and the troubadour tradition and all. No. Wrong. Super wrong. What about the Grail Maidens? Where does that come from? See, so you have to take certain motifs, like, wait a minute, they're all kind of red-headed. Maybe, is that going to be a lead? Let me chase that down. And other things. Oh, it's Sangral, or it's holy blood, or it's something else. A lineage, a bloodline. A sacred cup, or a sacred bloodline. Oh, see, people got into that in the 80s. And went, oh, we've been following one idea, that it's a holy cup full of blood, but maybe, no, that's wrong. A different spelling of the term means it could be a sacred bloodline. Sang Real. Oh, wait, let's follow that up, and look what happened. Then they find out that there's initiates, secret societies like Prior of Sion and Knights Templar, and initiates as highly placed as Leonardo da Vinci. Then it leads you to say, well, did they encode things in their artwork? Oh my God, don't ask. Don't start there. Oh my goodness. Because then, under the veil of them being Christian, no. There's all this pagan symbolism in it. You see, and the journey begins slowly. If you're open-minded, you can follow it and learn things. Then you find out about the conflict between these two sects. And that always pops up through history in different countries in a slightly different way. Protestant, Catholic, or all sorts of different ways that this might manifest. But once you have these occult secrets, then you can decode it. You can say, oh, I see what's going on here. These two groups have been at each other's throats, vying for world power for a very long time.